That, I realized, was the true victory. Not the fact that they might finally face consequences for their actions, but that I had long since moved beyond needing them to. The month after discovering David and Serena together in his office was a blur of pain and practicalities. There were calls to vendors, canceling arrangements for David's company launch party, awkward explanations to puzzled relatives, and the logistical nightmare of untangling my life from the one I had planned around David and his children. I had moved out of my beloved home in Manhattan to my sister's house in Connecticut, leaving behind furniture, memories, and the life I had carefully constructed. The photos of Leo and Clara, which I had once thought would never leave my sight, sat in a box on my childhood dresser, glittering reminders of promises broken. "You need to put them away, Mabel," my sister had said gently one evening, finding me staring at the open box, the children's smiling faces catching the lamplight. "Keeping them out is just keeping the wound open." I knew she was right, but something in me resisted. Putting them away felt like the final acknowledgement that it was over, that the future I had envisioned was truly gone. But it wasn't just the broken family unit that hollowed me out. It was the loss of Serena, my daughter-in-law, my confidant, the person who had been my constant through nearly a decade of life. Her betrayal cut even deeper than David's in some ways. He had been my son, she had been my chosen family, my anchor for much longer. I discovered the full extent of their deception in pieces over those first few weeks. Friends called hesitantly, revealing that they had seen David and Serena together on occasions when both had claimed to be working late. A former employee of David's company reached out apologetically, explaining that their relationship had been an open secret in certain circles for months. "I assumed you had an arrangement," she'd said uncomfortably, "otherwise I would have said something." The most painful revelation came from my old friend Clara, who had remained in New York after I moved to Connecticut. "I can't keep this from you anymore," she confessed over coffee, her eyes filled with apprehension. "Serena was bringing David to their Hamptons house when you were out of town for bakery conferences. It started almost a year ago. A year. Not the 3 months David had claimed. Not a recent development or a moment of weakness, but a calculated, long-term deception by both of them. The betrayal was complete. While I had been planning family holidays, sharing my insecurities with my daughter-in-law, and building what I thought was a life with my son's family, they had been carrying on behind my back. Not just an affair, but an elaborate web of lies that made me question every interaction, every memory, every moment I had shared with either of them. And then came the social media announcement that nearly broke me. 6 weeks after I caught them together, Serena posted a glittering engagement announcement on Instagram. The caption read, "When you know, you know. So excited to become Mrs. Richard Harrison. Engaged to the man of my dreams." The diamond on her finger was larger than any I had seen, ostentatious, in the way Serena had always preferred. The photo showed them on a yacht, champagne flutes in hand, the Manhattan skyline serving as backdrop. They looked radiant, triumphant, as if their relationship had been a straightforward love story rather than one built on betrayal. Comments flooded in, congratulations from colleagues, excitement from mutual friends who either didn't know the full story or chose to ignore it. The casual cruelty of it staggered me. Not only had they betrayed me, but they were now rewriting the narrative, erasing me from their story as if I had never existed. I shut down my social media accounts that same day. "I still can't believe they got engaged so quickly after everything happened," Elias said, pulling me back to the present. We had moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, momentarily retreating from the bustle of the gala. "In retrospect, it makes perfect sense," I replied. They needed to legitimize their relationship as quickly as possible. An engagement transformed them from affair partners to a love story. Elias's expression was contemplative. "How did you hear about their wedding? That must have been another blow." I smiled wryly. "Actually, by then I was in Seattle, starting my new life. I only found out when a mutual friend mentioned it in passing during a phone call, clearly unaware that I didn't know. By that point, I was 6 months into my advanced culinary program and had just landed my first major baking contract. I remember feeling not happy exactly, but not devastated either. Progress. Slow progress, I acknowledged. There were still bad days. Days when I'd see a happy family that reminded me of us, or when a photo of my grandchildren would surface online. But they became less frequent. Across the ballroom, I noticed Richard and Serena preparing to leave, their body language tense, despite the social smile fixed on their faces. Richard's hand was at the small of Serena's back, guiding her toward the exit with what appeared to be practiced urgency. "They're leaving," I observed. Elias followed my gaze. "Not surprising. The board chairman probably advised Richard to make himself scarce once he realized you were here with me. The foundation's legal team would be having fits knowing he's in the same room as the lead attorney on the fraud case. I'm surprised they stayed as long as they did," I mused. "Appearances," Elias said simply. "In their world, leaving early from an event like this would be an admission of weakness. They'd rather endure discomfort than show vulnerability." His insight struck me as profoundly true. Richard and Serena had always been consumed with appearances, with the image they projected to the world. It was what had drawn them together, and what now seemed to be holding them in a gilded cage of their own making. As they reached the ballroom doors, Serena looked back, her eyes finding mine across the crowded room. For a brief moment, something passed between us. An acknowledgement, perhaps, or a question unasked. Then Richard's hand at her waist urged her forward, and they disappeared into the hotel lobby. An unexpected weight lifted from my shoulders with their departure. I hadn't realized how much tension I had been carrying, knowing they were in the same room, until it was suddenly gone. "You know what's strange?" I said to Elias. "For years after the betrayal, I imagined this moment, seeing them again, showing them I was fine, maybe even better than fine. I thought it would feel more, I don't know, triumphant." "And it doesn't?" he asked curiously. I considered the question. "It does, in a way. But mostly, I just feel sad for them. They got what they wanted. Each other, status, recognition. But they don't seem happy." "The price of getting what you want, through deception," Elias said quietly, "is never being able to fully trust in it. They'll always wonder if what happened to you could happen to them." The wisdom of his observation resonated deeply. I had never considered that aspect of their betrayal, the seed of doubt it must have planted in their own relationship. If Richard could cheat with Serena, might he not cheat on Serena? If she could betray her mother-in-law, what else might she be capable of? In those dark months after discovering their affair and losing my grandchildren, I had felt like I had lost everything. My son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, my place in our social circle, the future I had planned. All gone in an instant. The grief had been all-consuming, a physical ache that followed me through days that blurred into each other. I remembered one particularly low moment, about 3 months after the betrayal, when I had run into a mutual acquaintance at a cafe in Connecticut. She had asked about David and the children, clearly unaware of what had happened. When I explained the situation in halting words, her expression had shifted from shock to pity. "Oh, Mabel," she had said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You poor thing, are you okay?" The pity in her eyes had been unbearable, worse somehow than the pain of the betrayal itself. I wasn't, poor Mabel, the victim of a cruel deception. Or at least, I didn't want to be. That moment in the cafe had crystallized something for me. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be defined by what had been done to me. I wanted to be defined by what I would do next. That was when I decided to apply to the culinary program in Seattle. I needed a clean break. Not just from David and Serena, but from being seen as their victim. I needed space to figure out who I was without them. "And who did you discover you were?" he asked, genuinely curious. The question made me smile. Someone stronger than I knew. Someone with ambitions beyond being a grandmother. Someone who could build a life on her own terms. The orchestra began playing a slower melody, drawing couples to the dance floor for the final numbers of the evening. Elias extended his hand to me. "Dance with me one more time before we call it a night." As we swayed together beneath the crystal chandeliers, I found myself reflecting on the strange, circular nature of life. 10 years ago, I had believed that Serena's betrayal was the end of my story. Instead, it had been merely a painful chapter in a much longer, richer narrative. The woman I had become in the aftermath, more resilient, more authentic, more confident in her own worth, was someone I might never have discovered had my family life proceeded as planned. The bakery career I had built, the life I now led with Elias, the sense of purpose I had found. None of it would exist in the same form if I had remained just Grandma Mabel. "What are you thinking about?" Elias murmured, his cheek against my hair. "Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best things in your life," I replied honestly. "If Serena hadn't betrayed me, I might never have found my way to Seattle, to my true creative voice, to you." His arms tightened around me. "Then I owe them a debt of gratitude, though I doubt they'd appreciate the sentiment." I laughed softly, the sound lost in the music surrounding us. "No, I don't imagine they would." As the song drew to a close, I caught sight of our reflection in one of the ballroom's ornate mirrors. Elias and I, moving in perfect synchrony, his tall frame complementing mine, our expressions peaceful and content. We fit together, not because one of us had altered ourselves to accommodate the other, but because we had each arrived in the relationship as whole, complete individuals. It was, I realized, everything I had ever truly wanted. Not the status of being a perfect grandmother, but the joy of being truly seen and valued for exactly who I was. Seattle greeted me with relentless rain that first winter, a fitting backdrop for the gray emptiness I carried within. I had rented a small studio apartment in an older building near the culinary school, the kind of place where the radiator clanged at odd hours and the floorboards creaked with every step. It was nothing like the spacious Manhattan home I had shared with David, or the trendy suburban house he'd bought with Serena. This space was wholly mine, imperfect, modest, and untainted by betrayal. During those first few months, I existed rather than lived. I attended classes, completed assignments, and went through the necessary motions of daily life, but a fog of numbness surrounded me, a protective barrier between my wounded heart and the world around me. Sleep eluded me most nights. I would lie awake, replaying memories, searching for signs I might have missed, moments when I should have realized what was happening. Had there been a change in the way David spoke about Serena? Had Serena's enthusiasm for family gatherings been overcompensation for her guilt? The questions circled endlessly, offering no peace, no closure. The hardest part wasn't losing David, I confessed to Elias as we walked through the hotel lobby, preparing to leave the gala. It was the constant questioning of my own judgment. If I could be so completely wrong about the two people I trusted most, how could I trust myself about anything? Elias nodded thoughtfully, helping me into my coat. "That's the most insidious aspect of betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your ability to trust." "Exactly," I said, grateful for his understanding. I started second-guessing everything. Maybe I wasn't actually talented as a baker. Maybe all my other friendships were as superficial as mine with Serena had turned out to be. Maybe I wasn't worthy of genuine love. The doorman hailed a taxi for us, and as we settled into the back seat, I continued sharing this chapter of my journey, one I rarely revisited but felt compelled to express tonight. "I hit rock bottom about 4 months after moving to Seattle," I said, gazing out at the city lights blurring past the window. "I missed a major project deadline because I couldn't focus. My professor, this intimidating woman who rarely showed emotion, called me into her office. I was sure she was going to tell me I wasn't cut out for the program. What happened?" Elias prompted gently when I paused. She sat me down and said, "Mabel, grief is normal. Heartbreak is normal. What isn't normal is letting someone else's betrayal steal your future, as well as your past." Then she handed me a business card for a therapist and told me I had 2 weeks to get my head straight or reconsider my place in the program. "Tough love," Elias observed. "But exactly what I needed," I acknowledged. I called the therapist that same day. Dr. Marissa Lambert had become my lifeline during those dark days. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner. She had guided me through the labyrinth of grief and betrayal. She hadn't offered empty platitudes or promised that time would heal all wounds. Instead, she had given me practical tools to navigate my pain, and challenged me to examine the beliefs about myself that had made me vulnerable to people like David and Serena. "You allowed David and Serena to define your worth," she had said during one particularly difficult session. And you gave them power over your sense of belonging. The question isn't why they betrayed you, Mabel. The question is why you outsourced your self-worth to them in the first place. Her words had stung, but they had also illuminated a truth I had been avoiding. That part of my devastation stemmed from having built my identity around being David's mother and Leo and Clara's grandmother. Without those roles, I had felt not just betrayed, but erased. Therapy was brutal at first, I told Elias as our taxi navigated the late-night traffic. Marissa didn't let me stay comfortable in victimhood. She kept pushing me to examine my own patterns, my own choices. That couldn't have been easy, he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. It wasn't. There were sessions I left in tears, convinced she was just being cruel. But gradually I started to see what she was doing. She was helping me reclaim my power by showing me where I had given it away. One breakthrough had come when Marissa had asked me to describe what I wanted in my future. Not the future I had planned with David and the children, but the future I would choose for myself if there were no constraints. I had struggled to answer, realizing with a jolt that I had adapted my dreams to fit their life plans so completely that I barely knew what I wanted independently of them. The recognition had been both terrifying and liberating. I remember sitting in her office, completely unable to articulate my own dreams, I said to Elias. It was as if someone had asked me to speak a language I'd forgotten. That's when I understood how much of myself I had compromised, even before the betrayal. That's a common pattern in unbalanced relationships, Elias noted. One person's dreams become subordinate to the other's. Exactly. And the worst part was, David had never explicitly asked me to do that. I had done it willingly, believing it was what love required. I shook my head at the memory. Marissa helped me see that real love expands you. It doesn't diminish you. The taxi pulled up to our hotel, and we fell silent as we made our way through the lobby to the elevator. It wasn't until we were inside our room, the door closed behind us, that I continued. The culinary program became my salvation, I said, slipping off my heels with a sigh of relief. I threw myself into it completely, channeling all my pain and confusion into my work. And something unexpected happened. My baking got better. It became more authentic, more emotionally resonant. Elias loosened his tie, watching me with attentive eyes. Pain has a way of deepening creative expression. It does, I agreed. My professor, the same one who had given me the ultimatum, pulled me aside after a project presentation and said my work had taken on a depth it lacked before. Whatever you're going through, she told me, don't waste it. Use it. That advice had become my mantra during those dark months. I used my pain, transforming it into pastries that connected with people on an emotional level. I created flavors that offered both sanctuary and possibility, perhaps because that was what I so desperately needed myself. Slowly, the fog began to lift. There were still bad days when a happy family would trigger memories of what I had lost, or when a photo of my grandchildren would arrive in the mail. But they became less frequent, less overwhelming. 6 months after moving to Seattle, I took Dr. Lambert's advice and joined a local baking club, forcing myself to engage socially again. The first outing had been awkward, my social muscles atrophied from isolation, but by the third meeting I found myself laughing genuinely at a fellow baker's joke, the sound surprising me with its authenticity. That was when I knew I would survive this, I told Elias, who had changed into more comfortable clothes and was now sitting beside me on the edge of the hotel bed. That moment of genuine laughter felt like coming up for air after being underwater for so long. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Healing isn't linear. It comes in moments like that. Little breakthroughs that show you're still capable of joy. Exactly, I smiled, touched by his insight. The pain didn't disappear entirely, but it stopped defining me. I started having good days between the bad ones, and eventually, the good days outnumbered the bad. By the end of my first year in Seattle, I had begun to build a new life, different from the one I had planned, but increasingly one I valued. I had formed new friendships, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. I had excelled in my program, earning recognition for my innovative approaches to baking. I had even begun dating again, tentative, exploratory coffees that sometimes led nowhere, but occasionally offered pleasant company. None of these relationships had approached the intensity of what I had shared with David, but I had come to recognize that intensity wasn't necessarily a marker of health or sustainability. What I sought now was something steadier, more balanced, a relationship where both people could grow without diminishing each other. I remember thinking, about a year and a half after everything happened, that I no longer wished David and Serena had never gotten together, I admitted to Elias. Because if they hadn't, I might still be in that unbalanced relationship, slowly losing myself without even realizing it. Elias's expression was thoughtful. That's a profound shift. From seeing their betrayal as the worst thing that happened to you, to recognizing it as a painful but necessary catalyst for growth. It didn't make what they did right, I clarified. The deception, the lies. Nothing excuses that, but I could finally see that the end of that relationship had freed me to become someone stronger, someone truer to myself. I moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights twinkling against the night sky. By the time I finished the culinary program and started my own small bakery, I realized I had built something that was truly mine, not an accessory to someone else's success, but my own achievement. And that felt more fulfilling than anything I had experienced in my relationship with David. Elias came to stand beside me, his arm slipping around my waist. And that's when we met. I leaned into him, smiling at the memory. That's when we met, and everything changed again, but this time in all the right ways. 3 years after leaving New York, I found myself in a place I never expected, content with my solitude. My bakery, though small, had begun to attract attention for what clients called my intuitive flavors, pastries that seemed to anticipate their emotional needs as well as their practical ones. I had a circle of friends who knew nothing of my past betrayal, who had never met David or Serena, who knew me only as Mabel Hayes, the focused baker with the quiet laugh and occasional flashes of dry humor. My apartment had evolved from the sparse, temporary-feeling studio to a one-bedroom in a historic building with high ceilings and abundant natural light. I had furnished it thoughtfully, each piece chosen not for status but for meaning or function. It was, in every sense, a home. My home, created on my terms. I had dated occasionally during those years, brief connections that never quite deepened into anything serious. I wasn't consciously avoiding commitment. Rather, I had developed a clarity about what I wanted and was unwilling to settle for less. If that meant being alone for a while longer, I had made peace with that possibility. The pivotal moment, what I later recognized as my true awakening, came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I had received an email from an old acquaintance from New York, someone who had been peripheral to my social circle with David. The message was brief. A casual mention that she would be in Seattle for a conference, and wondered if I might be free for coffee. Almost as an afterthought, she added, "Saw David and Serena at a charity fundraiser last month. They seemed tense. Rumor has it all is not well in paradise." I sat staring at those words, waiting for the familiar twist of emotion. Vindication, perhaps, or at least a grim satisfaction that their betrayal hadn't led to lasting happiness. But the feeling never came. Instead, I realized with a start that I felt nothing at all about their marriage. No curiosity, no resentment, not even indifference. Their lives had simply ceased to be relevant to mine. I closed the email without responding and walked to the large windows of my apartment, watching the Seattle skyline as twilight deepened into evening. The realization settled over me like a gentle wave. I was free. Not just physically removed from their orbit, but emotionally untethered from their story. Whatever happened between David and Serena, whether they remained together or drifted apart, succeeded or failed, had no bearing on my life or happiness. The revelation was so simple yet so profound that I laughed out loud, the sound echoing in my empty apartment. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months, trying to capture the sense of lightness I felt. "Today I realized I'm truly over them," I wrote. "Not because I've forgotten, but because I've grown beyond the need for their story to have any particular ending. My happiness is no longer connected to their unhappiness. My success no longer measured against their failure. I am at last the author of my own story. Now, years later, in the quiet of our hotel room after the eventful gala, I found myself sharing these pivotal moments with Elias as we processed the unexpected encounters of the evening. The memory of that journal entry remained a touchstone, marking the moment I had truly begun to heal. "That journal entry," Elias said as we shared a late-night cup of tea. "That's what you showed me on our third date." I smiled, remembering his surprised expression when I had shared that vulnerable piece of myself. "I wanted you to understand where I was coming from, that I wasn't carrying unresolved baggage from my past." "It was the moment I knew you were different," he admitted. "Most people I dated were still fighting old battles, still trying to prove something to ex-partners who weren't even in their lives anymore. But you had this clarity about you, this sense of having fully processed your past." My bakery's first major client came as a surprise, the very culinary school where I had rebuilt my life. The dean had approached me after a small gallery showing of student and alumni work, where I had displayed conceptual drawings for healing pastries, food designed to comfort and nourish. "Your perspective is unique, Mabel," she had said, her usual brusqueness softened by genuine interest. "We're renovating the East Wing next summer. Would you consider submitting a proposal for the new student cafe?" Standing in her office the following week, I had felt a flutter of anxiety. This was the woman who had once given me an ultimatum about my academic performance, who had witnessed my lowest point. Now she was offering me a professional opportunity that could establish my nascent bakery's reputation. "I know what you're thinking," she said, noting my hesitation. "You're worried I'm offering this because I feel sorry for you, or because I'm playing favorites with a former student." I nodded, unable to deny the concern. "I don't do pity projects, Hayes," she said firmly. "I'm approaching you because your work shows exactly the sensitivity and innovation this space needs. But if you're not ready for a project of this scale, say so now, and we'll both move on without hard feelings." Her directness, so familiar from my student days, steadied me. "I'm ready," I said with more confidence than I felt. "And I'd be honored to submit a proposal." That project became my proving ground, the first step in establishing Mabel's Morsels as a business capable of handling significant commissions. I assembled a small team, worked endless hours, and poured everything I had learned, both professionally and personally, into creating a space that would inspire creativity while offering comfort. When the renovation was unveiled 6 months later, the response exceeded my expectations. The East Wing, once a sterile collection of classrooms and offices, had been transformed into a dynamic environment that facilitated both collaborative work and individual reflection. Students gravitated to the space, faculty remarked on the improved energy, and before the paint was fully dry, I had received inquiries from 2 other educational institutions interested in similar transformations. That first success gave me the confidence to expand, I told Elias as we prepared for bed in our hotel room. The events of the gala had left us both too wired for immediate sleep, and talking through my journey seemed to help process the unexpected collision of past and present. It wasn't just about proving myself professionally, it was about trusting my own vision, my own instincts. Elias nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's often the hardest part of recovery from betrayal, learning to trust yourself again." "Exactly," I agreed, settling against the hotel pillows. After being so wrong about David and Serena, I questioned my judgment about everything. That project helped me reclaim my confidence. With each subsequent commission, my bakery grew in both size and reputation. I hired 2 junior bakers, then an assistant, then a production manager. We moved from my tiny home kitchen to a small studio space in an artist's collective, then to a proper bakery with exposed brick walls and abundant natural light. The work itself evolved as well. While I had initially focused on residential and small commercial spaces, I began to attract clients seeking more complex environments, a wellness center for cancer patients, a community space for at-risk youth, corporate environments designed to reduce stress and enhance collaboration. Throughout this professional expansion, I continued my personal growth as well. The therapy sessions with Dr. Lambert, became less frequent, but remained a valuable space for reflection. I maintained my baking habit, finding solace and clarity in the magnificent landscape surrounding Seattle. I cultivated friendships that were reciprocal rather than dependent, connections based on mutual respect rather than need. Dating, however, remained a challenge. I approached it cautiously, wary of repeating old patterns. I had a definite type before David and Serena, I explained to Elias. I was drawn to charismatic, ambitious men who seemed to have everything figured out. After them, I became more discerning. I wanted substance over charm, integrity over ambition. Hence your initial skepticism when I asked you to dinner, Elias said with a smile. I laughed softly, remembering my hesitation. You ticked too many boxes: successful, articulate, attractive. Based on past experience, I should have run in the opposite direction. What changed your mind? He asked, though he knew the story well. You listened, I said simply, not just to my words, but to the meaning behind them. And you shared yourself authentically, without the carefully curated persona most people present on early dates. Our early relationship had developed gradually, each of us bringing a thoughtfulness to the connection that reflected our respective journeys. Elias had his own history, a marriage that had ended when his ex-wife decided she wanted a different life than the one they had built together. Though the circumstances differed from my experience with David and Serena, the core lesson was similar. Love alone wasn't enough without shared values and mutual respect. I remember being nervous about introducing you to my friends, I admitted, thinking back to that period of tentative hope. They had seen me rebuild myself after David and Serena, and they were protective, especially Marcus. Marcus had been my first real friend in Seattle, a fellow culinary student who had appointed himself my unofficial guardian. When I finally introduced him to Elias 6 months into our relationship, his scrutiny had been almost comical in its intensity. I thought he might pull you aside and threaten bodily harm if I hurt you, Elias recalled with a chuckle. He practically did, I confirmed. He cornered you at the bar while I was in the restroom. I came back to find him giving you the third degree about your intentions. He asked if I understood what you had been through, and if I was prepared to be patient with your issues, Elias said. I respected him for it, actually. It showed how much he cared about you. Marcus's protective instinct had been well-founded. The Mabel he had met in culinary school had been fragile, her confidence shattered by betrayal. He had witnessed my gradual rebuilding, had been there for the tearful nights and moments of doubt. His concern about Elias had come from genuine care. What convinced him you were different from David? I asked, curious about Elias's perspective on that early meeting. Elias considered the question. I think it was when he asked why I was interested in you, and I talked about your baking philosophy before mentioning anything about your appearance or status. He seemed surprised by that. I nodded, understanding. David had always emphasized how I would fit into his world, how I would look on his arm at events, how my family background, Marilyn Mao, would integrate with his social circle. He talked about me as an accessory to his life, rather than a person in my own right. Kamelin Mafa Habitan Male. Whereas I was captivated by your mind, Elias said, his eyes warm in the soft hotel lighting. Your creativity, your insight, your quiet strength. Everything else was bonus. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. David had wanted me to complement his life. Elias wanted to build a life with me as an equal partner. David had seen my success as secondary to his own. Elias celebrated my achievements as enthusiastically as his own victories. Even the way they handled conflict differed fundamentally. David had avoided difficult conversations, preferring to maintain a pleasant facade while resentment simmered beneath. Elias addressed issues directly but compassionately, believing that honest communication strengthened rather than threatened our connection. The turning point in our relationship, I said, thinking back, was that weekend in Vancouver when we had our first real argument. Elias nodded, remembering. About my working through dinner 3 nights in a row while we were supposed to be on vacation. I was terrified to confront you about it, I admitted. With David, expressing disappointment or frustration always led to him withdrawing emotionally. I expected the same from you. Instead, you apologized and thanked me for telling me how my behavior was affecting you, Elias recalled. That's when I knew this was different, I said softly. Not perfect, but healthy. Real. The realization had been profound. That conflict, when approached with mutual respect and a genuine desire to understand rather than win, could actually strengthen a relationship rather than damage it. That honesty, even when uncomfortable, was safer than pretense. In the months that followed that Vancouver trip, our relationship had deepened. We had begun to discuss the future, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. When Elias proposed a year and a half after we began dating, it wasn't a dramatic production like David's carefully orchestrated moment. Instead, it happened on an ordinary Sunday morning as we shared coffee on his apartment balcony, the question emerging naturally from a conversation about our shared vision for the years ahead. I knew I wanted to marry you the moment you said you needed to think about it, Elias said, now reaching for my hand. Most people would have felt pressured to give an immediate yes, but you took the time to be certain. I loved that integrity. I had needed 3 days to consider his proposal. Not because I doubted my love for him, but because I wanted to be sure I was choosing marriage for the right reasons this time. Not for status or security, or to fulfill social expectations, but because I genuinely wanted to build a life with this particular person. When I said yes, I reminded him, I told you I was choosing you, not just the idea of marriage or the role of wife. And I told you the same, he replied. That I was choosing Mabel Hayes exactly as she was, not some idealized version I had constructed in my mind. That distinction had made all the difference. With David, I had often felt the need to edit myself, to suppress opinions that conflicted with his, to present a polished version of myself that would enhance his image. With Elias, I could be authentically myself, complex and imperfect, knowing that he valued the real woman rather than a curated facade. Our wedding had reflected that authenticity, intimate and meaningful rather than showy, each element chosen to celebrate our connection rather than impress guests. My dress had been elegant but simple, the flowers seasonal and locally grown, the music selected for personal significance rather than traditional expectation. Most importantly, I had walked into that commitment with open eyes and a whole heart, not seeking completion, but choosing partnership with a man who respected my independence, even as he cherished our connection. That day, Elias said softly, when you walked toward me in that simple white dress, with that quiet smile that reaches your eyes, I remember thinking that all the chaos and pain of our pasts had led us precisely where we needed to be. I squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought us together. From the wreckage of what we thought we wanted, we found what we actually needed. It was a truth that extended beyond our relationship to encompass our entire lives. The detours and disappointments, the betrayals and losses, all had shaped us in ways that prepared us for a deeper, more authentic connection than either of us might have been capable of without those painful lessons. As we finally settled into sleep, the events of the gala fading into perspective, I found myself filled with an unexpected sense of peace. Seeing David and Serena again had not reopened old wounds, as I might once have feared. Instead, it had only confirmed how completely I had healed, how thoroughly I had moved beyond that chapter of my story. The life I had now with Elias, with my thriving bakery, with friends who knew and valued the real me, was not a consolation prize for what I had lost. It was the life I was meant to have all along. The Wellington Medical Foundation Charity Gala faded into the past as Elias and I returned to our normal lives in Seattle. The encounter with Richard and Serena, while momentarily disruptive, ultimately reinforced how far I had come from the devastated woman who had fled New York a decade earlier. "Do you think the lawsuit will settle?" I asked Elias one evening about a month after the gala. We were sharing a quiet dinner on our deck overlooking Lake Washington, the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "It already has," he replied, setting down his wine glass. "The foundation board voted to settle last week. They didn't want the details coming out in court, especially the evidence about how long they'd known about the problems with Richard's financial practices." I nodded, digesting this information. "And Richard?" "The settlement includes his stepping down from the board," Elias said carefully. There's also a review pending with the regulatory board about his business licenses. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction that justice would be served for the investors who had suffered, but also a tinge of sadness for the brilliant career derailed by ethical compromises. Richard had always been gifted. His businesses truly could have helped people if they hadn't been rushed and falsified for the sake of his ambition. I wonder how Serena is handling it, I mused. Elias gave me a curious look. You still care about her? Not in the way you mean, I clarified. But she tied her entire identity to being Mrs. Richard Harrison, to the status and connections it brought. Without that, she'll have to figure out who she really is. Exactly, Elias finished for me. And that's not an easy journey, I should know. The conversation shifted to other topics. An upcoming project for my bakery, a case Elias was preparing for trial, plans for the weekend. The normalcy felt precious, a life built on mutual support and genuine partnership rather than appearances or status. Over the next several months, my bakery continued to expand, taking on larger and more complex projects. What had once been a one-woman operation now employed a team of 12 bakers, production managers, and support staff who shared my vision for creating pastries that nurtured both body and spirit. One particular project became a turning point in my professional transformation, the redesign of the menu for a renowned rehabilitation center for trauma survivors. The director had sought me out specifically, having seen my work on the culinary school cafe. Your pastries don't just taste good, she had said during our initial meeting. They actually help people heal. That's what we need here. Not just aesthetics, but food that supports emotional recovery. The challenge was immense, creating a menu that would feel safe and nurturing for people whose sense of safety had been violently disrupted. I spent weeks researching trauma-informed nutrition, consulting with therapists, and most importantly, listening to the survivors themselves about what they needed from their food. This is the most important work I've ever done, I told Elias one night as I pored over recipes and notes at our dining table. These people have been through unimaginable pain. If I can create food that helps them feel even slightly safer, slightly more at peace, you will, he said with quiet confidence. You understand rebuilding after trauma in a way most bakers can't. That's your unique gift. His words struck a chord. The painful experience that had once seemed like the worst thing that could happen to me had, over time, become a source of insight and empathy that informed my work in profound ways. I understood intuitively what it meant to feel unsafe, to need nourishment as an ally rather than just sustenance. When the rehabilitation center opened a year later, the response was overwhelming. Residents reported feeling more secure, staff noted improved therapeutic outcomes, and the culinary community took notice, with the project winning several prestigious awards for innovation in healing foods. Mabel's Morsels is redefining what comfort food can be, wrote one prominent critic. Mabel Hayes' work transcends typical culinary aesthetics to create food that truly supports the healing process on multiple levels. Her pastries don't just taste good, they actively participate in the therapeutic journey. The success of the rehabilitation center led to similar commissions across the country: wellness centers, mental health facilities, pediatric clinics, each one allowing me to refine my approach and expand my vision. Mabel's Morsels grew from a local Seattle bakery to a nationally recognized name in healing environments. With this professional success came a deepening confidence in my own voice and vision. The woman who had once deferred to others' judgments, particularly David's and Serena's, now spoke with quiet authority, born of experience and proven results. I no longer needed external validation to trust my instincts or value my contributions. You found your sweet spot, Elias observed one evening as we celebrated the bakery's expansion to a second location in San Francisco. You're working at the intersection of your talent and your purpose. His insight resonated deeply. What had begun as a career had evolved into a calling, creating food that helped others heal, grow, and transform. The pain of my past had become a resource rather than a burden, informing my work with an empathy and insight that technical training alone could never provide. This sense of purpose extended beyond my professional life into my personal relationships as well. Where I had once sought validation through others' approval, I now approached connections from a place of genuine curiosity and open-hearted presence. The need to please, to perform, to be seen as perfect, had fallen away, replaced by an authenticity that attracted like-minded individuals who valued substance over appearance. My friendship circle, once dominated by Serena and our shared social set in New York, had evolved into a diverse community of creative, thoughtful people who enriched my life in different ways. Some were fellow bakers who challenged my thinking and inspired new approaches. Others came from entirely different fields. A marine biologist whose perspective on natural systems influenced my ingredient choices. A retired judge whose stories about justice and human nature deepened my understanding of ethical complexity. A pediatric nurse whose frontline experiences informed my healing food designs. These relationships were built on mutual respect rather than dependency or performance, each person bringing their whole, imperfect self to the connection. The contrast with my friendship with Serena couldn't have been more stark. Where that relationship had ultimately revealed itself as competitive and conditional, these newer bonds were characterized by genuine support and celebration of each other's successes. Even my relationship with my sister had transformed. Once strained by her concerns about my settling for a bakery career instead of the more prestigious path she had envisioned, we had gradually found new understanding. My success on my own terms had finally convinced her that I had chosen correctly, and more importantly, our conversations had evolved from her directing to truly listening. I was wrong, she had admitted during a visit after the rehabilitation center menu launched. I wanted security for you, but I defined it too narrowly. You've built something meaningful, Mabel, something entirely your own. Coming from my traditionally minded sister, this acknowledgement represented a significant shift, not just in how she saw me, but in how she understood success itself. Of all the relationships in my life, however, none reflected my transformation more clearly than my marriage to Elias. Unlike my relationship with David, which had been characterized by my adaptation to his needs and priorities, my partnership with Elias was founded on mutual growth and genuine equality. We had built a life that honored both our individual passions and our shared values, a home that reflected both our sensibilities, traditions that held meaning for us both, a balance of independence and intimacy that allowed each of us to thrive while growing together. I was thinking about what makes us work, I said to Elias one evening as we walked along the lakeshore near our home. It was our anniversary, 7 years since our wedding in the botanical garden, and the milestone had prompted reflection. "What's your conclusion?" he asked, his hand warm around mine despite the autumn chill. "We want each other's success as much as our own," I replied after a moment's thought. "Not just professionally, but personally. Your growth, your happiness, your fulfillment matters to me as much as mine does. And I know you feel the same." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good way to put it. I think the other key is that we don't expect each other to be static. We give each other room to evolve, to change, to become more fully ourselves over time." His insight struck me as profoundly true. Unlike with David, who had seemed to want me to remain in a particular role that complemented his life, Elias genuinely celebrated my continued evolution. He wasn't threatened by my success or by the ways I had changed during our years together. He was interested, supportive, curious about who I was becoming. This freedom to grow without fear of outgrowing the relationship had allowed me to achieve a level of self-actualization I had never imagined possible in my previous life. I had become not just successful, but whole, integrated in a way that aligned my work, my relationships, and my inner values into a coherent, authentic life. The achievement of this kind of wholeness represented a mastery not just of my craft, but of myself, the ability to live from my center, rather than in reaction to external expectations or past wounds. It didn't mean perfect happiness or the absence of challenges, but rather a groundedness that allowed me to navigate life's inevitable difficulties without losing my core stability. When the invitation to the Future Generations charity gala arrived, I had viewed it not as a threat to this hard-won peace, but simply as a choice to be made based on my current priorities and desires. The woman who had fled New York in heartbroken devastation could never have imagined returning a decade later with such equanimity, such comfortable ownership of her narrative. Attending the gala, seeing Richard and Serena again, witnessing their discomfort at Elias's connection to the foundation lawsuit, had provided a kind of symmetry to my journey. I had come full circle. returning to the scene of my greatest pain with my greatest triumph. Not just professional success or a happy marriage, but the woman I had become through the process of rebuilding. You know what struck me most about seeing them again? I said to Elias as we neared the end of our anniversary walk. The lights of our home visible through the trees ahead. What's that? He asked. How ordinary they seemed, I replied. Not villains or monsters, just flawed people who made selfish choices. There was a time when they loomed so large in my mind, when their betrayal defined everything about my life. Now they're just people I used to know. Elias smiled, understanding the significance of this perspective. That's the final victory, isn't it? When they lose their power, not because you've defeated them, but because you've outgrown the story entirely. Looking toward our home, the life we had built together based on mutual respect and genuine love, I knew he was right. My achievement of mastery wasn't measured by comparing my life to Richard and Serena, or by proving something to those who had hurt me in the past. It was evident in the person I had become, in the contributions I was making through my work, and in my capacity for authentic connection with those who truly saw and valued me. The wounded young woman who had left New York believing her life was over had transformed into someone stronger, wiser, and more genuinely herself than she ever could have been had the betrayal not occurred. The painful breaking had ultimately created space for a more complete becoming, a life built not on others' expectations or social formulas for success, but on my own deepest values and authentic gifts. As Elias and I reached our front door, warmth and light spilling onto the path from within, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey, not despite its painful chapters, but including them. For in the end, it wasn't the absence of hardship, but its integration into a larger, more meaningful narrative that constituted true mastery of one's life. The morning after the Future Generations Charity Gala, headlines appeared in the financial news outlets. Prominent philanthropic foundation under scrutiny amid settlement. Though Richard wasn't mentioned by name in the initial reports, industry insiders would immediately know who was involved. Elias showed me the article over breakfast in our hotel room before our flight back to Seattle. It's official, he said quietly. The foundation released a statement late last night. I scanned the carefully worded press release, noting how it emphasized the institution's commitment to ethical practices while minimizing the specific violations. They're protecting themselves, I observed. As expected, Elias agreed. But the regulatory board investigation will be more thorough. This isn't over for Richard. As we prepared to check out, my phone chimed with an incoming text. I glanced at the screen and froze, surprised by the name that appeared there. It's from Serena, I said, showing Elias the notification. He raised his eyebrows. Are you going to read it? I hesitated only briefly before opening the message. Can we meet before you leave town? Just 30 minutes. The cafe in your hotel lobby. Important. What do you think? I asked Elias, showing him the text. He studied it thoughtfully. That's your call entirely. Do you want to see her again? I considered the question, searching my feelings. There was no anxiety, no dread, just mild curiosity. I think I do, I said finally. There's something unfinished between us. Not in a way that troubles me, but I'd like to hear what she has to say. Elias nodded. I'll finish packing while you meet her. Take all the time you need. 20 minutes later, I spotted Serena at a corner table in the hotel cafe. Gone was the polished, confident woman from the gala. This morning, she looked tired, her makeup minimal, her posture less certain. When she saw me approach, she straightened, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't either, I admitted, but here I am. I owe you an apology, Serena said, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. A real one. Not the half-hearted version I've told myself was sufficient all these years. I waited, giving her space to continue. What Richard and I did to you was unforgivable, she continued, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. We betrayed your trust in the worst way possible. And then we tried to rewrite the story, to make ourselves the heroes instead of the villains. Why now? I asked quietly. It's been 10 years. She looked down at her hands. Seeing you last night, how you've built this amazing life. how genuinely happy you seem, it forced me to face the truth I've been avoiding. We didn't do you a favor by betraying you. We didn't set you free. We were selfish and cruel, and you succeeded despite us, not because of us." The honesty in her words surprised me. This wasn't the defensive Serena I had encountered at the gala. "And Richard's career?" I began carefully. "It's imploding," she finished. "The businesses that made his name, that I helped promote and protect, it was flawed from the beginning. People were hurt, and now it's all falling apart." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Not for Richard's professional consequences, which were deserved, but for the personal toll I could see it taking on her. "Don't be," she replied with sudden fierceness. "This reckoning has been coming for years. The lawsuit just accelerated it." She paused, then added softly, Your friend Judge Thorne is good at his job." "Yes," I agreed, "he is." Silence fell between us, not uncomfortable, but weighted with shared history. "Are you happy, Serena?" I asked finally, the question emerging from genuine curiosity rather than malice. Her eyes met mine, startled by the directness of the question. For a moment, I thought she might offer her usual polished deflection. Instead, she sighed deeply. "No," she said simply, "I haven't been for a long time." Ladies, if you're watching this and something in my story resonates with you, I want to speak directly to your heart for a moment. When someone betrays you, whether it's a partner, a friend, or family member, it can feel like they've taken everything from you. Your trust, your confidence, your sense of self. I know that darkness intimately. But here's what I learned through my journey, and what I hope you'll take away from this story. They can never take your power unless you give it to them. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. Your future isn't limited by someone else's betrayal. Your identity isn't defined by being someone's victim. The path forward isn't about revenge or proving your value to those who failed to see it. It's about reclaiming your narrative, rebuilding on your own terms, and redirecting your energy toward creating rather than reacting. This isn't easy work. There will be days when grief overwhelms you, when doubt creeps back in, when the unfairness of it all seems too much to bear. Feel those feelings. Honor them, but don't let them become your permanent address. The greatest triumph isn't showing your betrayer what they lost, though I won't deny that can be satisfying. The true victory is reaching a place where their opinion no longer matters to your sense of self-worth. I rebuilt my life not to prove something to David and Serena, but to discover who I could become without the constraints of that relationship. The woman I found was stronger, more authentic, and far more capable than the one who had defined herself as someone's mother or grandmother. You have that same strength within you, the same capacity for resilience, the same potential for a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one you're mourning. Trust yourself again. Forgive yourself for not seeing the signs. Allow yourself to grow from this experience rather than being diminished by it. And know that the darkest chapter of your story can become the foundation for its most triumphant turn. Your happiest days aren't behind you. They're ahead, waiting to be written by the woman you're becoming through this fire. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.